So a few weeks ago, I was scrolling through my Twitter feed and I noticed something seemed to be happening at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. It seems there was quite an upheaval on their board of trustees, where 4 members of the 8-member trustee board were actively trying to publicly oust the president of the university. I decided I wanted to know more, so I went to the Detroit Free Press to learn a little bit more about it. But first I wanted to know a little bit about Wayne State. I checked out their website, and they have a strategic plan that says a couple of interesting things. It says by 2021, they want to be very distinctive, and that distinctiveness will result in a thriving institution known for academic and research excellence, where every student has a clear pathway to success and the opportunity to flourish in a diverse, collaborative, and innovative environment. Through its commitment to research and community engagement, Wayne State will continue to be recognized as a leader in Detroit's revitalization and will grow its reputation for understanding and addressing urban challenges. Wayne State's total enrollment is over 27,000, including 12,000 full-time undergraduate students. It also includes a law school, a medical school, a pharmacy school, and an undergraduate and graduate schools. Over 24,000 of the 27,000 students on campus are Michigan residents. On the athletic side, they have 18 varsity sports. They are an NCAA Division II member and a member of the Great Lakes Intercollegiate Athletics Conference. In 2017 and 18, the GLIAC President's Cup, the Great Lakes Intercollegiate Athletics Conference, Wayne State finished 4th overall behind Grand Valley State and other schools in their conference. I decided to also look at their Title IX proportionality. While 56% of the undergraduate population on campus is female and 44% is male, Wayne State has 61% males in the athletic population and 39% females in the athletic population. This puts them out of compliance with Title IX's Prong 1. I also wanted to look at athletic scholarships, and they are also out of compliance with Prong 1, as males receive 57% of athletic aid and female athletes receive 43% of athletic aid. You can find this data on the Equity in Athletics Disclosure Act report that Wayne State filed. The total amount spent on athletics in 2017 and 18 was a little over $13 million. So this is not a small program. This is a good-sized program in Division II. So we know that Wayne State is a public mid-sized school with a board of trustees elected by the voters of Michigan. As I mentioned, the Detroit Free Press has been looking at Wayne State and their governance issues, and in particular, reporter David Jesse has been covering Wayne State and has been front and center in the very public battles involving half of the board trying to publicly out the president, Roy Wilson. The trustees have been accused of meddling in other campus-wide issues. Most important to this podcast, NCAA athletic financial aid reports. Indeed, David Jesse reported in October of 2019, a Wayne State University board member repeatedly tried to run university operations behind the back of the school's president, including asking for the school's responses to the NCAA about athletic financial aid be sent to her for review before going to the NCAA. Highly unusual and most inappropriate for a trustee member to be doing this. The Free Press continues, when she didn't get her way, she demanded the university fire employees. The university hired an independent investigator and found that the report didn't directly name the board member, but the complaints attached to the report did, saying it was Sandra Hughes O'Brien, the former board chairwoman and current leader of a group of board members who are trying to oust Wayne State President Roy Wilson. It is a very interesting situation that has yet to reach a resolution, so I thought I should invite reporter David Jesse to the podcast to help us understand more fully. David Jesse is the Detroit Free Press's higher ed reporter covering Michigan's universities. He was the 2018 Education Writers Association Best Education Beat reporter and also a 2016 and 2019 Education Writers Association reporting fellow. You can also follow him on Twitter at reporter David J. David, welcome to the podcast. Glad you could join us.
Thanks for having me.
You've been doing some interesting work in the last couple of years, I would say, but the most interesting one that I'd like to talk about today is it involving Wayne State University, an NCAA Division II school located in the southeastern corner of Michigan, in Detroit. Is that correct?
Yep, right in the heart of Midtown Detroit.
Midtown Detroit. And they've been having some trustees, governance, and presidents issues, which is right at the heart of this podcast. And particularly with the trustees and the one of the incidents involved oversight of intercollegiate athletics. So could you walk us through this?
Sure. So, just as a little bit of background, there are 8 trustees on the board, which is kind of an odd thing to have an even number. In Michigan, we're kind of weird in that the board of the 3 major universities, including Wayne State, are directly elected statewide. So the entire state votes to elect the Wayne State board members, and you can live anywhere in the state. Most of them tend to live in the Detroit area, but you can come from wherever. They are partisan races, so Democrats and Republicans. In this case, right now, Wayne State's board is 7 Democrats and 1 Republican. So the fighting is not a partisan issue. It has more to do with the performance of the president, Roy Wilson, and then also the direction of the university, particularly of the medical school and some partnerships that it has with existing hospitals in downtown Detroit.
He's in Michigan, is that right? David?
I'm sorry, I lost you. I lost you there for a
Okay,
second.
no worries. So can we start first with the statewide elections?
Sure, go
And
ahead.
I assume these are for public universities in Michigan. Tell me a little bit more about what that looks like, especially I assume you are a resident of Michigan, so maybe you can partake in this.
Yeah, so there are 12 public universities, 9 of them kind of the regional level, Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, those the ones with the with the directions in their names. Those are appointed by the governor, the board members there. The 3 major universities, Michigan State University, the University of Michigan, and then Wayne State, are elected statewide. The Democrats and the Republicans each nominate people at the convention for those seats. The seats are 8-year board seats terms, so they're staggered. There are 2 up per election cycle every 2 years, and so you can be along. You can run 3 times, win 3 times, and serve 24 years. I mean, you can get quite a run on a board. Um, they're generally located at the end of the ballot. Until recently, there has not been a ton of interest, I would say, in those seats. However, this is Michigan's, as we mentioned, home to Michigan State University, and with all the Larry Nassar, situation going on there, who's on the boards of these schools is becoming more and more of interest to Michigan's voters.
That would make sense to me, and it really is. I think it'll be surprising to any of our listeners that Michigan allows that, and it's unique to me that it's Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State. What's your sense of how Wayne State got molded in with Michigan and Michigan State, two much larger institutions?
Sure. It's because Wayne State is considered a still a major research university, even though Michigan State and U of M are much, as you said, much bigger. Wayne State's considered a prominent urban research community, and so that's kind of how they ended up getting their own board. And again, they're located in the heart of Detroit. Detroit in Michigan generally is where the political power of the state resides. So I'm sure that went into it as well.
And you mentioned they have a medical school, which always draws more scrutiny.
Sure. Yep. They have a medical school. It's affiliated with the Detroit Medical Center, which is a major hospital system in Detroit and in the state. So yeah, there's some prominence to Wayne State, despite its being much smaller than Michigan State or Michigan.
Got it. Got it. So last week, you attended a very public and very contentious board meeting where the board, who had been trying for months to oust the president who had signed recently, I think, a new 5-year deal a few months earlier. Can you walk us through some of the contentious issues that happened on that particular day?
Sure. So, just as a background, there are four board members who are generally considered anti the president, and there are four board members who are considered pro the president, which, as you might expect, leads to all kinds of issues when you're split like that. And so, for the past year, they have been fighting over whether or not Roy Wilson, should continue as president, whether he should be fired. And about a month ago in November, the board held a committee meeting. One of the interesting quirks of Michigan law is that Michigan's universities, the public universities, only have to meet in public for quote unquote formal sessions. Now, what's interesting about that is they get to decide what's formal. So the entire board can meet together legally behind closed doors. So they had a meeting. They were talking about a variety of issues. At the end of the meeting, the anti-Wilson people looked around, said, "Hey, there's four of us here at the meeting. One of the pro-Wilson people is missing. We're gonna make a motion and try to fire the president because we have the votes." So they made a motion, fire the president. The other people got up and walked out. The pro-Wilson people got up and walked out of the meeting, and they voted anyway. And they said this was a binding vote of the board. The pro-Wilson people said, "Well, no, it wasn't, because the one thing we have to do in formal session all the time is vote on the president's contract." They asked for a legal opinion from the state attorney general, who delivered it literally 15 minutes before the meeting on Friday started that you were referencing. And it just jumped off from there. They were arguing about whether meetings were legal, whether motions were legal, and just everything quickly turned contentious.
Now, some of this has to do with long-serving board members just not liking the new president or receiving complaints about the new president. Just give us a little snapshot of what their issues are with the president.
So part of the issue, the major issue, is the medical center. President Wilson wants to move the agreement between the Wayne State's medical school and the hospital, the Detroit medical system, over to a different health system. There are members of the board, the people who don't like him, who do not like that. They thought he brought in consultants, spent too much money to make this happen. There's some personal issues with control and his communication style to board members. For example, about a month ago, I guess, a little more than a month ago, Wayne State announced that they were going to give free tuition to anybody who lived in or went to a Detroit high school and graduated. And that seems like a great, they had the governor in, they had the mayor of Detroit in. Seems like a celebratory time. We're going to help kids. Many of Detroit's kids are living in poverty. We're going to give them a free chance at the university. But board members complained that they hadn't gotten notice of the meeting in advance, that he was only talking to certain people, that they didn't get to approve it. And so, again, there's communication issues going on. Issues about when the board has to be involved, how much power individual board members have, and all that sort of combines with this, in some cases, it almost seems very personal hatred of the president to make it contentious, make an interesting stew of emotions going on when the board gets together.
So back in October, you wrote about a board member and you identified her as Sandra Hughes O'Brien, who inappropriately reached out to try to run university operations behind the back of the school's president. And this is where it relates to my podcast of including asking for responses to the NCAA about athletic financial aid to be sent to her for her review before sending them back to the NCAA. So inserting herself into the university's operations. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So there was a complaint made with the Higher Learning Commission, which is the accreditation agency. They asked Wayne State for a report. Wayne State hired an outside investigator who did some digging around. And in the case you reference, it appears that they're called governors, the board member, Sandra Hughes O'Brien. At one point in 2018, there were some concerns about the financial aid that was being given to athletes, about how it was being divided up and were they following all the NCAA rules, et cetera, et cetera. and it was alleged, and then the attorneys said yes, it happened. That Hughes O'Brien went to the university auditor after a meeting, said, I want to preview any reports that go to the NCAA. Don't want any, she said, I don't want anything going to the NCAA without my review and without me conducting interviews. And then, by the way, don't share this conversation with the university president. Make sure you keep it private. Make sure I get to see everything before it goes on.
Did you have a sense that she had a sense that there was something improper about what was going on with financial aid, or she just had heard something? Where did this come from?
I think she had heard something. There was definitely, the university auditors were looking at the issue. The NCAA had asked them to respond. I'm still not clear. We're still waiting to get some more information over what exactly was going on. But they were, she was involved as somehow or notified about that, and she went behind the president's back to try to shape that. It seems to me that she was trying to shape whatever response they were going to be sending to the NCAA, whether she was trying to protect somebody or she was trying to just, make sure Wayne State looked good. I'm not, that's very unclear to me at this time, but there was no doubt, at least in the mind of the independent lawyers who did the investigation, did a bunch of interviews, that, this happened, that she was doing it. And she had a track record of in at least two other cases of doing similar things.
Yes, and you mentioned those in your articles as well. So just for clarification, the NCAA requires that the athletic financial aid offers be coordinated with the campus-wide financial aid office so that teams don't over-award beyond NCAA scholarship limits. And in this situation, that should have just been handled between the athletic department and the financial aid office. So it is unusual for a trustee to insert themselves in the process when really the next logical person that would have inserted themselves into this process might have been a vice president for finance or even the president of the university. Do I have that right?
Yeah, exactly, right? This seems like just a normal kind of, you never want to say routine when the NCAA is involved, but, the normal work of university administrators, right? This is why you have people in athletics and in the financial aid office and in the auditing department who would just, they'd get together, make sure all the paperwork matched up and send it off to the NCAA. Again, not even a matter, the routine that would come before a board unless there was some sort of, they uncovered that they were massively overpaying and there needed to be disciplinary action or something like that taken. But generally speaking, this is an administrative, everyday, day-to-day operations of the university type of a matter that board members, aren't responsible for.
And in fact, in your article, you wrote that the Higher Learning Commission came back in their report and said, quote, your findings identify examples of board overreach into day-to-day management matters of the institution, a lack of support for the integrity of fair and ethical processes, and actions that disrupt and decrease the effectiveness of the institution, its leadership, and faculty and staff. That's a pretty strong statement, pushing back on the trustees' governance of the institution.
Yeah, and they put in some pretty, they had some very clear things on what they wanted them to do to correct this. And then on Friday, one of those being a code of conduct, kind of an agreement that all the trustees agree, hey, look, this is how we're going to behave. We're going to act like trustees. We're going to act like the governing board. We're going to, set the strategic vision for the school. We're going to talk about allocation of resources to fit that vision. And then we're going to hold the president accountable for putting that in place and administrating it on the day-to-day, basis with members of his team. The board now has voted down that code of conduct twice. It's really kind of up in the air now. One of the things we're trying to, in fact, I was making calls earlier this morning trying to figure out what exactly is going to happen now. Again, the Higher Learning Commission is one of those bodies you don't want to mess around with. You don't want to put your accreditation at stake in any sort of way.
And again, accreditation is key to being able to access federal funds for a variety of things, not the least of which is student loans.
Right. And it also just sends a message, right? If you're a parent out there, you're not going to want to send your kid to an unaccredited school because of financial loan, not being able to get the federal student loans that you might need to afford it, but also just kind of, what does that degree become worth if it comes from an unaccredited? So this is really kind of a hornet's nest that they're kicking, and the question is, how bad are they going to get stung?
Yeah, and again, the Higher Learning Commission said this in your report: a strong board acts as a unified group of leaders in the eyes of its internal and external stakeholders, displacing individual agendas and actions. It can only lead to confusion and a loss of credibility for the institution if individual trustees advance agendas that conflict with overall board decisions and strategic directions. So then the question becomes, who do you go to help manage this dysfunction that exists in this situation? It sounds like Wayne State elected to bring in a governance consultant from the Association of Governing Boards, Rick Lagon. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. They brought him in. They had him Skype into the meeting on Friday, and he didn't pull any punches either. Told the board, in public session to their faces that they were dysfunctional and they weren't working the way trustees should work, and they needed to straighten up. Again, he said, he's not asking them to rubber stamp everything the president brings to them, because that's not the role of a board, to be a rubber stamp. But on the other hand, it's not to put themselves either, as the case that we've just been talking about, in place of the president or the athletic director or the financial aid director and trying to run the university or run a department, but to set that broader vision. And right now, I think everyone's just a little flabbergasted that you can't seem to, this board is so set on opposing each other that you can't do anything. The 4 anti-Wilson board members pulled everything off the consent agenda at the board meeting and voted no on the vast majority of stuff, tying things up. And, simple things like they couldn't approve the minutes of the previous meeting. They had a request to change the name of a department, just routine everyday business matters of a university, and it's starting to grind to a halt. And if it keeps going for much longer, it's going to, I think, really cause some issues, both in terms of athletics, in terms of academics. You're going to start thinking about faculty recruitment. You're going to start talking about student enrollment. It has the potential to really harm a university that lately has been kind of, before all this, on the upswing.
Definitely. Have you had a sense in any of your meetings that people from the athletic side of the university are upset specifically about this interference, or was there any particular misconduct uncovered because of this particular insight that this board member says she had?
No, there's no indication that the board member had special information and was able to go in and root out corruption or issues or problems or anything like that. It just seems to be simply a matter of a board member who wanted to act like an administrator and to deal with issues that are not part of their responsibility.
It's a pretty amazing story, and I guess in your phone calls around, have you heard of any resolution as to who might come in and supervise the trustees? In other words, 8 seems like an odd number, so you've got a split constantly of 4 against, and somebody from the state who would come in and say, look, let's get this together, or is it really left to Wayne State to deal with it themselves?
So it's really kind of left to Wayne State. The universities here in Michigan, especially the 3 big ones that we talked about, Michigan State, Michigan, and Wayne State, are generally considered autonomous, constitutionally autonomous under Michigan's constitution. So the legislature controls some funding, some state aid that goes to to each of the universities, although like every other state, that's becoming less and less each a percentage of the overall budget each year. So they could tie some changes, to the funding, but that next budget won't be done till next spring, the middle of budget year now. The governor could step in. There are processes for removing board members, just like removing any other elected official, but you'd have to prove some sort of malfeasance or something along those lines. I think a lot of people are really afraid that the only chance for change is a year out now in an election. There'll be two board seats up in November of 2020. The new board won't be seated till January 2021. So if they can't work something together, can Wayne State really limp through, a year of this deadlock, another year of this deadlock? I don't see that I don't see how that could happen. At some point, the trustees are just going to have to decide, hey, look, we're gonna have to get along. We're gonna have to get some stuff done, and we're gonna have to decide to act like board members should act.
Right. Well, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to continue watching, and I'm sure you're going to continue to cover it as thoroughly as you have. David, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your schedule and joining us today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Always glad to chat.
Thank you. So our tip of the week is a recommendation that trustees and presidents take a look at the annual report released by Richard Lapchick, who works in Florida, and he issues a yearly Division I Football Bowl Subdivision Gender and Racial Diversity Report Card. And he looks at key positions in the leadership chain. He looks at presidents, he looks at faculty athletics representatives, he looks at head coaches, he looks at athletics directors. And it's troubling to see the lack of advancement for women and minorities in this field. And Lapchick's study emphasizes that on a yearly basis and gives you a sense of whether, as a Division I program, your program is doing well or not doing so well in those categories. But this year, for D1 FBS, Richard Lapchick overall gave NCAA Division I an F grade in gender hiring and a C grade in racial hiring. And this should be problematic for all trustees. And you ought to be asking your athletic department how you can be held more accountable to actually saying what you believe and hiring who you want to hire through the best hiring practices possible that include racial and gender diversity. That's your tip for the week. A Twitter recommendation, a Twitter follow is @Richard Lapchick.